We have one attendee so far. Two. It's building. We're going to see if we get a couple more people, and then Megan will kick it off.
Yep, I can see two. I can see the two here now. So yes, let's give, I've got my email open in case any last minute issues come up with people getting in, but we'll give everyone another minute. Make sure we're all in and then we can get started. Okay, so I don't see any messages, any issues connecting so far, but I will keep an eye out. Okay, but we can get started with our introductory portion of this public meeting. So hello to everyone, panelists and attendees alike. Welcome to this virtual public meeting and input session for the Open Space and Recreation Plan of the City of Brockton. My name is Megan Shave. I'm the conservation agent for the city, and I'm here with the Open Space and Recreation Plan Working Group, who has been doing some behind the scenes prep work to get us to this stage of updating the Open Space and Recreation Plan for the City of Brockton for the next 7 years. So I'd like to start by just acknowledging our Open Space Working Group here. It's made up of representatives from various city boards as well as at-large residents who have associations with other groups and agencies with the city that are interested in open space. So I'd like to give them just a chance here to introduce themselves in terms of their interest in open space and what groups that they're a part of. So just going down the list here, we have John Van Kijken, if he'd like to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm John Van Kijken. I am, oh, Rob, you need to mute. Sorry. I am the manager of the Brockton Farmers Market at City Hall Plaza. And I also work for the Brockton Redevelopment Authority. And I am on the board of the DW Field Park Association.
Okay, and next we have Ulysses Varela.
Hello, hi everyone. My name is Ulysses Varela. I'm a commissioner on the Parks and Recreation, a lifelong resident of Brockton. I work in the city as well at Plymouth Superior Court. I've been on the commission, Parks and Recreations Committee for 5-6 years now, and big believer in green space. And just want to make sure that we protect the green space with whatever direction we go in the city of Brockton. Helps bring community together, and I hope we can put Brockton in a better position to be able to invest in our green space. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Laura Beekler.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Beekler. I am a resident of Brockton for 5 years. I moved here 5 years ago and really started to embrace volunteering and working in the city. And with that said, I was appointed to being part of the Conservation Commission and started there. And I also work the local elections. And I currently am employed at Bridgewater State University as the AVP of Enrollment Management.
Thank you. We also have Claire Lineberry.
Hi, I am currently Civic Chairperson for the Brockton Garden Club, and I'm corresponding secretary for DW Field Park Association. And I would like to see more open spaces used and the public enjoying them more.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Joanne Zygmunt.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joanne Zygmunt. I am a member of the Conservation Commission alongside Laura, as well as president of the Village Neighborhood Association in the Montello area of Brockton. I also serve as chair of the Central Plymouth County Water District Commission, which is tasked with helping protect Brockton's drinking water supplies. And my day job is as a city planner at Old Colony Planning Council. I'm particularly interested in parks and open spaces because we live in a sea of, asphalt and pavement and concrete. And I think our parks and playgrounds are one of the few places where all of us, no matter what our age or ability is, can actually go out and socialize and recreate and have fun and just kind of, hang around and enjoy our city even more.
Great. So thank you again, everyone, for attending. So I'd like to start, just for everyone's refreshing and maybe some new information, of what the open space and recreation plan is and why it's so important that we're doing this update that will revise our plan and put into place an action plan for open space and recreation for the next 7 years. So I want to start by saying that the open space and recreation plan is not unique to Brockton. This is an important planning document that was first introduced at the state level by the Division of Conservation Services. So this division brought up the idea of the open space and recreation plan as sort of a unified method for municipalities across the Commonwealth to start thinking proactively about their open space planning and to help guide them and help them plan, in particular, for funding opportunities for some of the projects and acquisitions that municipalities might be planning as part of their action plan. And so I'm going to go through, again, some more of this in details, and I will say both to our panelists and our attendees, if there's any questions, throughout this brief presentation about the open space plan or any of the topics I'm talking about, please feel free to raise your hand. I'm using the Zoom software and we can follow up and try to answer your questions. So about Brockton's open space and recreation plan, our last update was in 2013. And that update is available as a PDF on the city website if you'd like to take a look. Currently, the Division of Conservation Services is requesting an update every 7 years. And so our working group was assembled back in late 2019 for an update in 2020. Unfortunately, we had lined up some public meetings and were ready to go when we began shutting down due to the COVID-19 state of emergency. But we're getting back on board now, as you can see, making the best of the various technologies we have to pick up where we left off and to get this update back on board and submitted with the state. And why is it so important that we do that? Well, not only is it important as a planning document, but as I mentioned, the Division of Conservation Services likes to see an open space plan when they are considering granting funds from their various grant programs. So the division offers a variety of grant programs, and the prerequisite to most of them is that the municipality has an up-to-date open space and rec plan. And so going forward, the plan will have the dual purpose of, one, helping the city identify projects which we can pursue grant funding for, and at the same time making us eligible for those grants that would be coming from this Division of Conservation Services. So a couple of examples of the grants this division offers are the Parkland Acquisitions and Renovations for Communities Grant, also known as the Park Grant. This is a grant that Brockton has actually received before. The most recent park grant was for the renovation of the Gilbert Walker Playground near Oak Street. And this is one of their larger grants, and it is designed for both acquisition of lands for parks and also building or renovating, rehabilitating existing parks and playgrounds. And so a couple of other examples of grant programs are more focused on, for example, land conservation. So the land grant and the Massachusetts Land and Water Conservation Fund grant are both programs geared more towards acquiring or protecting parcels for natural resources. So for acquiring land as a conservation restriction, acquiring land of particular wildlife habitat value, and so on. And then one other interesting grant is the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Grant, which is only open to municipalities that the state considers urbanized, and Brockton is one of those. So it's another pot of money that Brockton has access to. Specifically, this one is for park renovations, development of new parks, new playgrounds, and acquisition, again, within urbanized areas. So there are some options for future land acquisition, rehabilitation, trail work, and so on under these grants. And hopefully the goal is to provide a robust open space plan that puts us in line to start applying for such grants in the next 7 years. So just a brief rundown of what the open space and rec plan is. So again, this is a template designed by the state. So all municipalities, all their plans have these basically 11 sections. 1 through 5 are introductory, sort of what we call inventory, background on the city, background on the current demographics, land use patterns, existing soil information, everything from the very historical up to what would be currently changing. And then the following sections are where sort of the change comes in and where the revisions come in. And that is the changing community visions, the analysis of needs, which feeds into the goals and objectives of the plan, and then the 5-year action plan, which outlines actions to help achieve the goals and objectives. So again, we're looking at updating our existing plan. We have our last plan from 2013, and now we're looking to update it again for the next 7 years. And so as the state outlines it, there are certain sections that get periodically updated, and then certain sections that must be updated with every update of the plan. And so just running through it, what's been going on in the background for the past couple of years, I've been working with the city departments and interns to check in on some of that inventory data, that background data that sort of forms the intro of our plan. And so that information will be used to update those sections as needed and form that sort of intro to our update. And then looking more broadly then at our open space working group has been starting to get together this public input portion, which is looking at particularly expanding into those revisions to the goals based on the analysis of needs, And that is put together again to get us our goals and objections and develop a 5-year action plan. And so in particular, the city cannot do, we can't analyze our needs if we don't have robust public input on what those needs are, as well as a sense of what the community sees as its broader goals in open space planning. The idea being then that based on this public input, the working group in the city will synthesize this into an action plan that will provide feasible and straightforward objectives with timelines and the who, what, when, where of what will be done over the next 7 years to help achieve those goals and address the needs that have been identified. Okay, it looks like we have a question at this point. Mike Smith, do you have a question about the plan so far? Let me see if I can. Okay, so I can move you over for a moment here. Okay, so Mike Smith, you should be able to introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Mike Smith. I usually do the needle cleanups and park cleanups. I usually organize them. My recent one was with the Salisbury River. How do you guys feel about the conditions of the Salisbury River? Like,
Well, I
with
believe
the
so.
conditions that they're in right now, have you guys been over there?
Yes, well, of course, the Salisbury River is an extensive system and
From over by the Pluff Elementary School, that section, from Verizon to the school.
so from Verizon to the school, so from where Trout Brook enters
Yep.
Salisbury Plain River?
Yep.
Okay,
So,
and
I did a 3-day cleanup over there that I organized. It took about 100 trash bags out of the water. If the water is protected, that's something that you guys you should look at to see what we can do to protect the wildlife and the trees, anything that's over there that has to do with wildlife, because that water is completely contaminated in that area. And there's a huge section next to that water that is city owned. There's a trailer over there and everything too, but the city owns that property too. If you guys want to add an open layout plan for a park or something that has to do with the park or the waterway, but that whole area right there, that's city owned right there.
okay, yeah, so that's good input. So I think what we should do, so we think about that, and as I get into the next bit here, is thinking about how we can use this information and interpret it into an actionable item that can go into the plan.
Have
So
you guys
let's, keep that in
you guys
mind
thought-
as we
have
go
you guys thought about
forward
putting-
and work with that.
have you guys thought about putting the bandalong litter trap back into the water?
By my understanding from hearing from DPW, probably believe it was last in July 2021, there is a bandalong litter trap in the Salisbury Plain River by the water treatment plant that DPW cleans out regularly.
Okay.
I believe when we last asked them about it, they said they had been out the prior Monday to clean it following one of the summer storms. I would assume it's still there. Again, this is information from July of 2021, but I would assume it's still there if it was this past summer, but certainly DPW would be able to provide an update of its condition in the following months from there.
So I spoke to Larry before I did my cleanup, and he was telling me that the section where I did the cleanup, that's where the litter trap was, and then they told me that it was completely removed. But right where I did that cleanup, there was literally a dam made out of trash that you could be able to walk across the water. And right where that trash was where that litter trap was prior.
Okay, and certainly we can follow up with DPW again as well to get the details on that again. My information's last from July in terms of its status, but my understanding is that it has been in operation outside the water treatment plant, but certainly there's room for discussion of in terms of its placement and possibly expanding that program beyond my understanding of there being the one by the treatment plant.
Okay. I just want to tap in on something else too. Were you guys saying that you guys want to have a no leash park for dogs? My only concern is a lot of the parks in Brockton are not maintained at the moment for our kids. So to have a dog park, I think brings more of a liability, because first, there's no profit that comes from it, but a lot of time too is these owners are not going to be cleaning up after their dogs. The needles that are being found in these parks are not even being cleaned up, never mind the droppings from these owners. I think that's definitely a far-fetched, definitely type of way to go to bring a park like that here. I think we definitely have to maintain the parks that we currently have before moving on to anything that is dog related. I got nothing against dogs, but I mean, our kids should be coming first.
Okay, yeah, so let me, based on that, I'd like to bring up, and I'd like to bring the working group in on this as well, because again, part of the goal here in updating the open space plan is to take all of this input that we've been getting between our survey, these public input sessions, and to rearrange it, distill it, put it into sort of the format of the plan that makes it or gives an action plan or gives a direction forward for the city. So in terms of, you know, what we're discussing now broadly, introducing the idea of the needs, what's missing, what needs to be addressed or promoted, and then how do you get from those needs, you know, how do they fit into the big concepts, you know, what are the big overarching visions for the city, and then getting down to then what are the specific actions that need to take place in order to achieve those objectives. So it really is the, you know, the who, what, when, where, how, you know, how do we think of specific, you know, events, the parties involved that will get us to these goals. And these goals ideally should be addressing the needs that have been brought up. So for example, talking about the needs of our waterways. The waterways, you know, it's a complicated system because it runs through and along, obviously, multiple land parcels. So, you know, there's parts of our waterway systems touching public space, touching privately owned parcels, with easements the city may have to the waterways themselves. But thinking about, and again, I open this to the working group as well, sort of what are the bigger goals that our needs for maintaining the waterways might fit into. And then, so, you know, thinking broadly about natural resource management, and perhaps it might be helpful. I have an example here. It's not about the river system, but I think it kind of could tie in. So this is an example that came up in the 2013 plan. And so the 2013 plan, some of the needs that came up from the public input was that
Yeah, okay, yeah.
yes, the majority of residents weren't familiar with the conservation areas, and that there was a perception that the conservation areas aren't safe. And so that distilled down to and fed into goals that there was a need to increase public awareness and appreciation of Brockton's natural resources. So for example, a goal like that would probably still be applicable now in this update. For example, the concerns with maintenance of the waterways, issues with upkeep from abutting properties and so on, that, you know, if there was a greater awareness and appreciation of our waterways, then perhaps there would be a greater sense of stewardship or sense of ownership or pride in our natural resources. So that's sort of the very broad take on it. But then the question is how do you get that into actionable items? So going back to the 2013 plan, the example of the needs related to the conservation areas, the commission brought the ideas of, you know, how do you promote stewardship? How do you provide information on these open spaces? And so some of the actionable items they had done, and the city has done since, is producing and distributing trail maps, improving signage. So specifically, for example, there's the examples of some trail maps, examples of improved signage at Stone Farm. I've also put here that it could be considered improving signage, perhaps, for example, at river crossings. Most of our major rivers, they have names, they have histories, but a lot of people in the city might not be aware of them. And there has been shown, you know, there is value in naming things. There is value in providing the public with the histories of our rivers. And so, for example, that might be one way to help, you know, improve the public's perspectives of the rivers, make them, you know, seem more valuable, educational signage and so on of the resources of the issues that our rivers face. And then again, the examples, you know, events. So activities and events, again, going back to the conservation area example, Wildlands Trust helped the city host an open space event, the Brockton Nature Festival, to bring people to the newly rehabilitated Stone Farm Conservation Area, you know, to make people aware of the area, to show them that, you know, the trails are here, they're walkable. The more people that use them, the safer they will be. And so by leading guided hikes, it showed people that yes, Stone Farm is very walkable and people should feel comfortable going out and using these new trails. And so I would think that this sort of pathway can carry forward into the next iteration of the plan. But again, you know, we have similar goals, you know, broadening awareness, promoting better protection of our natural resources. But, you know, what are the objectives? What are the actionable items? You know, what are some steps the city, public groups, residents themselves can do, you know, to help make the city more aware of its resources, to help ensure that they're protected. And so I open that up, you know, again, it's all about brainstorming at this point. We've got an idea to go off of, is, you know, where can we go with that? Okay, so I got Ulysses and Joanne. Ulysses, you want to chime in?
Mike, I just I wanted to say thank you for your work for that cleanup. 100 bags. That is quite the number. I will say, you know, Megan posed the question, what can we do as a community to bring awareness to some of these natural resources? And I think one of the things that we can do is exactly what you did. I'm not sure the group that you had with you, I don't know if you filled up all those 100 bags by yourself, but if you had a team, doing that and advertised it with hopes of attracting even more people to participate in that event. I think that in itself is bringing awareness to a great resource. The Salisbury River, I think in Brockton's history, it's kind of tough. Those old factories used to dump their waste in there. So I could only imagine if we did a test on to measure the quality of the water, what we would get. And then you add being in a city, years of neglect, and just polluting the water system. God only knows what those results would show. But given its importance, I think when I think of a vision for Brockton, I wish, in hindsight, and looking back, I wish that previous city leaders didn't develop the lands around it. Some of the places where the Salisbury Brook runs, it runs, buildings are built over it. It's covered up. And, when we think of downtown and revitalizing, I can only imagine what it would look like had some of those areas not been covered and the waterway, the brook was exposed. I like the idea of a guided tour, bringing even more awareness to the Salisbury Brook. The Salisbury River eventually works its way into the Taunton River, and the Taunton River finds its way to the Atlantic and opens up to Newport, that area. And it's just, if you think about that one piece, Brockton has its part in that one piece, in opening it up. So I think if we bring awareness to the youth, and we continue to do those cleanups, I would say with regards to those cleanups, Tim, the director of the Parks and Recreations, his staff, they try their best. Unfortunately, the staffing levels aren't there. So when we do those groups, outside parties do cleanups, Tim's there to help out, but it just helps out the city so much when, members of the community are participating. So I would say, let's continue to do those type of things. If you ask me, your next date, and if I'm available, I'll be there to help out. And we can continue to just bring awareness. And when it comes time to, those developments, when we hear issues that, a developer is wanting to build on this parcel of land next to this, land that's in conservation, or we happen to know that it's adjacent, abutting the river, we as members who want to bring awareness to these sensitive issues, we should be there raising the question, asking the question why, because maybe in the, when we do that, we can alter, have some influence over that board's decision. So I think, that's one thing that we can be at the forefront as well. These, as times are changing. These events are going to be made, this information is going to be made aware to the city of, to the residents of the city of Brockton. So it's on us to do our part to participate in these discussions. So hopefully I answered, Megan's question, but I also, again, wanted to thank Mike for his work. Thank you.
Yeah. And before I move on to Joanne and Laura, I just want to follow up because, the good points there about the cleanup events. Obviously, there are big on the boots on the ground approach that I think is very much needed. And so I think then the thought is, in terms of objectives and actions, is how do we put some more city power, behind those cleanup events? What can the city do to help advertise, help organize? Because again, the river system, it's a big system and it crosses a lot of property. And so I think having some city backing, from Parks Department, DPW will help, organize, sort of put some of that muscle and authority behind that work. And I can say again, and this is just speaking for DPW in general, I know in the past, DPW has had a permit through the Conservation Commission to do more work along the banks. It is the permitting process, takes a lot of effort, especially nowadays with the Wetlands Protection Act that does protect our riverbanks and floodplains. And so that's another, I think, avenue that needs to be explored, is assisting, different departments, groups coming together to help facilitate how that work is done. So assisting with DPW, other departments to get the right permits and so on, so that they can have access to these areas to do cleanups that, historically they have done and would keep doing, if they were assisted in getting them, whatever, again, permits and designs, plans if needed, in order to address some of the bigger removal efforts that are perhaps less feasible by a, community level, on the ground event. So, and then going off of your Ulysses' other point of, protecting what we can when it's hard to undo what's been done. I believe Rob mentioned in the chat, and it's been brought up in the news recently, the idea of daylighting streams. We can't undo the past in the sense we can't unpave everything, but there may be some opportunities, to daylight some previously buried parts of the river system. For example, sort of in the Trout Brook area, sort of near the area of Commercial Street, Center Street, there's potential properties where the city could do some daylighting. And so certainly there's potential to, little by little, maybe undo a bit of the, impervious impact and the impacts of runoff that we've put along Brockton's river system. And in terms of protecting what we still have, fortunately, the city of Brockton, being in Massachusetts, the floodplains are protected under the Wetlands Protection Act. Future projects in floodplain would need a permit from the Conservation Commission to do any of that work. And the Wetlands Protection Act requires that if you're going to fill floodplain, pave it, then you need to make new floodplains somewhere else. So that's one mechanism the city has to protect the floodplain that we still have. But, could we be doing more? Yes. So a lot of municipalities, they have wetlands protection bylaws or ordinances that are even more strict in terms of, protecting remaining resources than the Wetlands Protection Act. Brockton currently doesn't have a wetlands ordinance, but the Conservation Commission is working on reviewing that and revisiting that concept, because a lot of our surrounding towns, they have stronger floodplain and wetland protection laws than we do. So there is room for the city, to be doing more at the regulation and city policy level to be protecting our remaining river sources. And so that was just my sort of thoughts related to what Ulysses said. Again, I think moving towards actionable items, how do we put some power behind community cleanups? How do we get the city departments better equipped to assist in those activities. And then again, what can the city do at the level of its own policies and regulations to help bolster some of that protective work? And so with that, I'd like to give it over to Joanne and see what she has to follow up.
Thanks, Megan. I've got a few items that I've sort of bulleted in our conversation this evening. I think the point that was made earlier tonight about maintenance is a really important one. There are 2 parks and playgrounds in my neighborhood, both of which have had significant money invested in them over the last few years to install new equipment. But now there is a hole at the bottom of one slide that's been there for literally years, as well as a missing gate on a pretty much brand new fence in a playground as well too. I think if the city's going to pursue grants and if the city's going to invest our taxpayer money into parks and playgrounds and open space, then we need to make sure that the departments are able to manage what they have before they are required to maintain anything in addition to that. And that kind of brings me to my point really, is that I think, so in my job, when I talk to any city or town, no matter how big or small, you always hear the same thing. Every parks department is always going to say that they don't have enough equipment and that they don't have enough staff. But yet, when I go to a lot of communities in southeastern Massachusetts, their parks and their playgrounds are generally better maintained than ours are here in Brockton. So I feel like there's a need, and I don't know what form of actions this would take, but I feel like there's a need to have some sort of operational review, whether it's, how can the DPW and the Parks Department and the Planning Department work better across their kind of traditional silos as city departments to maintain these pieces of land. So for example, again, there is a small, like 2-house forested lot that is conservation land in my neighborhood with a stream that intermittently runs through it. Houses are being put up on adjacent lots nearby that can't really be prevented. But there's also a maintenance need on the DPW side of things to maintain that waterway, and it's not causing surface water flooding issues in the neighborhood. So I think somewhere in this plan, there needs to be a goal to help address the maintenance issues and improve the capacity of the city to deal with those, whether that's, working with our elected officials, including the mayor and city council, to actually increase the budget for the Parks Department, or whether that's looking at other grants or foundation monies or nonprofit groups to partner with to try and bring more resources into the city. What we do, like the Audubon Preserve that Wildlands Trust was involved in, they privately raised money to help make that happen in Brockton, and they now help maintain the trails there, and that's a win-win for the city. But I feel like often I hear that there's this need for more volunteers in the community to clean up our parks, and we need more of that for sure. But at the end of the day, if the city itself can't 50% contribute to that effort at least, then that's fundamentally going to be an ongoing problem. So I think some communities have permanent standing open space and recreation committees that implement, or not implement, but at least oversee the implementation of their open space and recreation plans. I don't know where this plan would sit once it's approved by the state, whether the implementation would just fall on council or back on Conservation Commission, or what role the Parks Department has. But I think there's definitely a maintenance and management issue that in this plan needs to kind of be addressed with some specific objectives and actions, for sure.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Joanne. So again, as you were talking, it brought up a couple things, yes, that I was thinking of as well. So I think the 2 things I'd want to follow up on, you mentioned sources of funding, and then sort of the coordination, in the city. How do we improve management? and how that relates. You brought up sort of the idea of a longer standing committee or an implementation committee. And I would say I do think that is something that once this plan is submitted, I think that should be, again, a goal in the plan is that, once we put together this plan, there does need to be an implementation committee that carries on, that is acknowledged and has the support of city council, and that it is sort of a unified body in that it would be an implementation committee, similar to our working group, in that it has representatives from different boards, different groups, different departments in the city. And I think that unified voice that persists past just approving this plan, but persists for the next 7 years, is that unified body, unified voice that the city is aware of, the departments know it exists, city council knows it exists. And I think that can be a mechanism for following up on not just the idea of how do you unify people to address some of these management issues, but anything else that comes up, how do you keep tabs on this 7-year plan for 7 years? And so I think that should continue to be a big goal, is having, the framework and putting together a unified committee with representatives that, have the connections, have the access to all these stakeholders, and are able to, keep the communication channels open and, keep everyone and themselves accountable, to the goals we set up and the action items, again, with the idea being that we, bring forth action items that we say, these are things we think can be done. We think that there's feasible timelines. We think that we know the who, the what, the when, we should be looking at this. So, we can start checking them off. And then the other part of that, the idea of funding. So I know I talked a little bit about the idea of grant funding, but something else, again, talking about other communities, where do they get their money? Why do they have nicer open spaces? Why do they have, certain positions or so on, that maybe Brockton doesn't have? Something that a lot of municipalities have adopted, but Brockton has not, is the CPA, or the Community Preservation Act. And that is another reliable source of money that exists in the state, and Brockton is currently leaving sitting on the table, and has been, because we have not adopted the Community Preservation Act. And I believe the hesitancy in doing so is because there is a cost to it. So basically, city residents would pay sort of like it would be a small tax increase typically. So they're paying in, a little bit to the CPA, but then it basically gives Brockton a seat at the table for this pot of money that the state makes available for open space management, but you don't get a seat at the table if you don't buy into it. And so Brockton so far, has not made that commitment. But again, it's another pot of money that other cities, other towns are using for their open spaces. And, we are not currently, but again, we're talking about source of funds, grants, but also something like the CPA, it's an option that, the city could be pursuing, and maybe it's something that we want to, put in the plan and say, an actionable item is we want it before city council again, and, we want the city to take another look at it. So those are sort of my follow-ups to Joanne there. And so it looks like, Laura, I'd like to give you an opportunity to chime in as well.
Sure, thank you, Megan. So basically, I would echo everything that Joanne mentioned about the concept of making sure that we have two items that are very much priority as we go towards the next 7 years and looking towards this plan. When you think about, we have to acknowledge that Brockton is a city and it is not a small town. So when we reference other towns and other areas that are smaller, we have to realize that it is sometimes a larger operation that creates a very tricky and diverse landscape that we have to navigate. And we see that come out in our parks. We have a lot of things in Brockton where I find great ideas, great plans, and then we don't have executors, okay? So the concept of executing can be as simple as calling to attention the need for service. We have a lot of generations coming up through the schools, and the concept of service has not been what it was when possibly my generation went to school. The need for volunteering is one thing that we can strengthen within our young people by simply allowing and facilitating pipelines of the work that the commission does at the conservation, educating our youth by taking action and saying, we're going to work with the curriculum and we're going to figure out a way with the administration at Brockton to work with young people to instill responsibility. I think that that's something we can put in an action plan and we can actually start to work on with dates of execution. Any plan is great, but we have to actually physically have dates that say by this year we're going to accomplish this. You have to keep people accountable that even have done this work in the plan. And so when I look to a place where I used to live, an example is East Boston, for example, was not, when I moved there, a great place. You go there now and it's a whole different area. And I see a lot of similarities to Brockton and how it's changing. So I know that I'm coming in from the outside and I'm not from Brockton. And so I have a different lens on it. And I see that and I acknowledge all the historical views of the problems, what has been done right, what has not been done right. But as we put a new lens on this 7-year plan, I am really looking forward to finding the ability to execute. I've been involved in quite a bit around the city, as simple as, a giving day for the homeless, and we had 60 people show up at the BCA and no one could execute. I went in there and executed because I had the experience to do it and we got it done. Execution is key to any plan that we put in place. And I think that I'm very excited to see what this plan can be, but the back part of the plan has to have dates attached. It has to be brought to the city council. It has to be made a priority. And if the fact is that we do not have the funding to do it, then we need to build in time and not draw out expectations that it's just going to be happening and we aren't sure where the money's coming from to fund this. We're not sure how we're going to execute. And I agree that the parks can be better here, but there's an education level amongst our citizens of Brockton that has to also happen. If our citizens don't know better, they don't do better. And so it's very hard to tell somebody not to pollute if they don't understand the concept of pollution. And so that's where we really have to merge education along with the next steps that we're going to take as a city. And that could be that we don't execute everything if we have to do a foundation piece first. So I'm bringing that lens to this working group because I think that that's very important in our next 7 years as we're planning this. Because just going before the city council, my feeling is that, oh, you're doing good work, tell us what you're going to do. And then it's going to turn back to the commission to do the work. And that's great, but we can't do it alone. And I think Megan can acknowledge that. I think everyone around here can acknowledge we do need executors, and executors can get the ball rolling. And usually when you do have that, the money does come because people see progress. So it can work together. And I really do think that this is going to be an interesting plan that we have to put together that works on the momentum of what Brockton currently has, as well as acknowledging that it has to somehow enter our young people's education so that they understand the responsibility to the wetlands, the responsibility to the parks around them. That's one of the things I see lacking here. It was put into the schools in East Boston, believe it or not. The high school students had to do a certain amount of hours. It was part of the curriculum, and it really did change the landscape of an area that a lot of people looked at as not a good place. And the amount of money that took was really getting a hold of the city council, telling them what we needed to have happen within the school committees to get that into the curriculum. And I think it's a technique that could also work here, but it's going to take time and execution. And I'm happy to, really look into what that would take. But it's something that we have to consider, because just telling somebody we're going to do something and not executing it time and time again, we all sit around this Zoom and we know that's what happens. And so we really want to put something together that we can actually make progress at. And so that's where kind of I think everyone has the right idea that this plan has to take the next step, but execution is a key to this. And that's actually getting in there and doing it, not just sitting on a committee and, and we know that happens a lot. So that's just kind of my 2 cents about it and what I've picked up on, and kind of coming from a lens of knowing where the parks, what they look like in Brockton. I've seen worse, I'll be honest. I've seen worse in different cities I've lived. Okay. So, but to look to Stoughton, to look to Easton, yeah, that's nice. They're not Brockton. And I think that it's not right to compare apples and oranges sometimes. Their towns are built different. Their management is different. We have to look to cities that are comparable to us and see what they're doing different in their infrastructure, to make sure that we are making a plan that's doable. And so that's why sometimes I reflect from looking to our neighbors, because they're not us. And it's very hard to take that and find any type of momentum when you just get upset that you're not them. So.
Yeah, so I think, Laura makes a great point there that, we're thinking about implementation and how do we take the next step, once we have ideas, who's going to carry them out, who's going to make sure we're carrying them out. And so, we're going to be then exploring what are the mechanisms here. So again, bringing up the idea of the younger generations and, getting this out into the schools. So then again, it's thinking of, who are the stakeholders in the school system? What are the mechanisms that Brockton uses, to get information, curriculum? What is Brockton currently doing? How can we make use of those mechanisms to make sure the information is getting to the stakeholders, to the people, that can make the decisions, that can, get the message in the door with whatever group we're speaking of, whether it's, students in the school system or so on. And so I think it's also going off of that, a big part of it is then, we're trying to figure out how do we make it work. And so the idea of, who are our city role models who have done it? And I do think Laura makes a good point that, it's easy proximity wise to look at Easton, look at Stoughton, look at the Bridgewaters and say, oh, they've done this. But again, sometimes it's hard just with the framework of how our city exists, how we have ordinances, our city council, our, mayor system, it's different than other towns. So sometimes there is the reality that, we can't do things exactly how, Easton has done it or would do it. And so even though they're our neighbors, I agree that maybe the city, when we're trying to come up with these action items, we need to think about who our role models are. So what are the comparable municipalities and what are some examples, municipalities that have done some of these things using similar systems, similar frameworks, similar obstacles as Brockton. So I know Laura mentioned East Boston. I think that'd be, something, to look into, what have they done? Again, in terms of the actual, who, what bodies, what mechanisms, how did they actually do it? And identifying what are some other comparable cities, So I think we should all be thinking about that. Who are our city role models? Who are the cities that are, maybe very similar to Brockton, but maybe a couple steps ahead? I think maybe, that might help us with sort of bridging this gap of, the history of doing a plan, but there's that step in between of, keeping the momentum. Surely there are examples out there in Brockton, excuse me, out there in Massachusetts. I think if we dig through and, take a look at, other documents and other, follow-up information that's been made available by other municipalities, there might be something in there that, if they have certain ordinances, if they did this, if they did that, if they involve this stakeholder group, and that managed to tap into, something at the community level that sparked more than anything previously. Is there an example, again, of a municipality that has successfully, gotten into the school system in terms of, making service in general, or making, environmental, activities a real priority. I know in terms of, Brockton currently, the Brockton High School, has their Envirothon team. It's been quite successful, in terms of every year tackling a different project, so there's glimmers of opportunity where, we know Brockton has pursued some of these, community groups, citizens, like youth groups. So we know that there's, the interest there, but how do we grow them? And maybe the answer is we need to find another city that is already doing it, and figure out how they turn things around, how they got the conversation started. Again, maybe they're only one step ahead of us, but if it's a step we haven't taken, then I think there must be some models out there that we can follow. Again, if we think about what is the framework of Brockton, what are the obstacles, I think it can help us find the municipalities that best match Brockton, because it might not just be a matter of, we got to compare to cities and not towns, or we have to find someone, a city that's the closest in size. There's a lot of components. So I think depending on what we're looking at, there's different, there's been different successes throughout the Commonwealth. So I think, there is still some research to be done. Unfortunately, we all would love to just have everyone swarm into the streets and start cleaning, and, but sometimes I think it's revealing that there's still a lot of work to be done before we can even be asking that sometimes of people. So, I think we need to meet people where they're at in the city of Brockton, and do better by everyone to make, our city government and how it functions work in our favor. And I think it'll take, some creative thinking. But I think, again, if we have the momentum of an implementation committee, we can have, set some goals, set some deadlines of, making those connections, doing that groundwork, and seeing if that improves our outcomes, in terms of maintaining city support while also encouraging the community side of it as well. So I know that's quite broad, but I think that's sort of where we're at. And I think as we go forward with this plan, sort of thinking about how we funnel that down into actionable items, where do we start with that? Okay. So coming back around, Ulysses, you want to follow up on any of that?
I think Joanne was first.
Okay. Yeah,
Thanks,
certainly.
Ulysses. Sorry, I'll be super quick. Kind of on another topic, I think one of the other things that the plan needs to look at, and you probably know this in way more detail than I do, Megan, but I feel like in a city like ours, everybody should be within a 15-minute walk to an open space or a playground or a park of some kind. And I feel like particularly the southern east side of Brockton perhaps has gaps where that's not the case. I feel one of the goals of the open space plan should definitely be that every resident who lives in Brockton is within a 15-minute walk of a park or an open space. And also that from their home to that park is actually walkable. So looking at how people are getting to these parks and open spaces. So for example, again, up in my neck of the woods, Hillstrom Park is a gem in the middle of Ward 6, but nobody really knows it's there. Sometimes it's closed with a gate. Sometimes there's not enough parking depending on what's going on. So I think when we're looking at 15-minute walks to these places in the city for our residents, we should also be looking at the sidewalks, the parking, and whether there's public transportation options in and around kind of these areas too. I don't know how easy it is for somebody, for example, from the east side to use public transportation to get over to the west side to use the Audubon Preserve. Is there a bus route that goes direct? I don't know. Do they have to change twice? Probably at least as a minimum, I would think. So I think that's an important component too.
Yeah, certainly. And I know some of, those logistical, we might not have the solutions, but I think the nice thing about the inventory sections is that it's at least an opportunity, to reflect on where everything is, what condition it's in. And I think that will help sort of inspire or pinpoint some logistical issues that maybe haven't been considered before. We were fortunate in 2019, we had an intern who grew up in Brockton and he was doing his master's in planning, and he did go around and do a photo inventory of all the parks, cemeteries, playgrounds, the conservation areas, and did some updates in terms of, he counted all the swing sets, all the basketball courts, their conditions. And he also included some notes about, what is the nearest bus line, how many parking spaces, all that sort of, it looks just like a lot of background data, but it's good to have, because I think that is what sort of gets at, you look at, what are the bus lines that seem to be touching these parks? Is there a connectivity issue? Even things I think he looked at, which parks, have signs or look like they had signs and they're now missing them. So I think we can use, some of that inventory data to inform, if we have a goal, again, related to awareness and accessibility, providing people with the knowledge of our open spaces and how to make use of them. I think then if that's a goal, then we can use the inventory data towards some of the actionable items of, how do we identify the connectivity issues? And then from there, we can start considering, possibly there'll be issues related to, infrastructure and things. It could potentially go very deep in terms of just the layout of Brockton. Unfortunately, we can't change things like where the roads are, but I think there will be something to glean from, even just updating all of our inventories. I think we can be using that to, get us started with some of that connectivity that you bring up.
Megan, can I speak?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I know you mentioned, we wish we could flood the streets with people and just let's do this. I think that's what we have to do. But the challenge is, how do we get a united front to do that? And it's a city. Brockton is a city, and there's a lot of moving parts. So it is gonna require a all-out effort to try to get the end result that we want. We want our parks to be clean. We want the community to enjoy them, and we want them to be there for future generations to come. So that involves community, government, and all of the above. People have to feel connected to these parks to want to maintain them and enjoy them. So making sure that they are known, that they're inviting, that they're welcoming, and that we want people to frequent these parks. Maintaining them, like you said, I think that's number one. If there's money out there, let's go get it, and let's maintain some, these parks that have been neglected. Since I've been on the Parks and Recreations Committee, there's been several parks, from grant funding, as well as some private donations. Robert Kraft, I forget the name of the park, but donated some playground equipment to one of the parks, and that was nice. I think we were one of 2 that were selected in Massachusetts, so that was great. So like Brockton needs to, with what we want to achieve, we have to really build that culture. We have to really build that culture that this is a city that values green space. And I'm trying to think, in my lifetime and what I've been around as an adult, even as a child, I think there was a Brockton, there was a campaign, Keep Brockton Clean. I don't see it as prevalent, as prominent in the city of Brockton right now. But I think something of that magnitude, I haven't seen any administration really take on, a strong campaign to fight the problem of like litter, it building up, to try to prevent people from littering, clean up, pick up, all that. There's, little pockets, people doing work here, people doing work there. But from our government, from a private group, but with the government with our government backing them, and really pulling together a united front. I think that will, like it's 20, here we are, everyone has a smartphone. I know we have that Brockton Now app. That's a mechanism that we can use to reach members of the community, to try to get them involved on this united front. So if, Joe Private and his group are doing a cleanup, put it on that app and let people, be made aware of it. And if they want to participate, if they're interested in doing their part in the city, I think that, that can go a long way. Inclusion is a hell of a drug. And if you give people the opportunity to be part of something, they will be there. It's human nature. That's the way it works. And then I just wanted to speak to Brockton as an image. When people come into the city, the city looks tired. The city looks, it looks like it's been neglected. So we need to really work with strategize on areas that we can have some influence. One, if we already own the land, maybe there's something creative we can do. And if we don't own the land, we reach out to the groups that do own the land and see if there's something that we can do collaboratively. I feel like, Brockton, there's only so many major egresses, entryways into the city. Let's highlight some of those entryways and try to build them up. So when people get off the highway, their first impression of Brockton isn't, wow, this tired city. Look at it, it looks so neglected. But let it be a city, wow, look at that, flowers, flowers, clean, nice. Let's highlight those areas. I think we should reach out to Westgate Mall and say, hey, can you clean up your area a little bit? That's their property, can you do, it is a public, we can call the Board of Health, say, hey, this is a public issue. We should make that phone call, not out of malice, not out of, we want the worst for these people, but for them to do their part to keep the city, keep the city clean. I remember, one of the areas when you get off the highway and next to that gas station, I think it's Go Gas, there's an empty plot of land. How come we can't have the school department put up an electronic sign of some sort with a nice flower bed in front of it, welcoming visitors and residents, into the city? How come we can't do something like that? I'm pretty sure, I don't see any development happening on that land anytime soon. How come we can't reach out to them and say, hey, can you do something? We'd like to we would invest in a sign and the flowers and the maintenance of it, but could you let us use this parcel of land? Little things like that will be embedded in people's minds, and they'll have a better appreciation for what Brockton is and what it can be. But if we don't start, if there's no campaign, if there's no mindset working with children at an early age, with adults, adults in whatever language they speak, if we don't have a campaign to reach those people, that end game that we want to get with trying to make Brockton, a healthy place, a healthy community, if we don't do that, we're not going to succeed in whatever goal we want to achieve for Brockton. It's a big challenge. But we got to use the tools to reach the citizens of Brockton, and they're out there. It's just, what was the word? We need to execute. Thank you.
Yeah. And so I think, going off of that, two big things or two big concepts there are, again, keeping up with that connection to the community, and then collaboration. So I think, again, building off of what we already have. So as Claire points out, Brockton has still been doing like the Keep Brockton Beautiful days. I think it's been tough the past couple years due to COVID, but certainly it's been ongoing for a while. I know growing up, I grew up in Brockton, and I remember all throughout elementary, junior high, my mom and my brother and I would do it. We'd often end up on Oak Street, we'd go along past the Fuller Art Museum up by DW, and we'd do that side of the street. So certainly that's a community event that's been going on for a long time and has still, been going on. It's probably going to need a pick me up, much like everything, things have been hard to keep going, but, I think it's things like that, programs, identifiable activities, like a lot of people in Brockton know Keep Brockton Beautiful. So I think there's some leverage and some power, some name recognition in that, you keep that, make sure, we get that going again, we keep, get it out there, figure out how to get the word out, to communities that maybe don't know about Keep Brockton Beautiful. Certainly, I know I went to the Hancock School, and I know we all knew about it back then, but, how do we let people know now it's still going on? And then, again, I think we can build from that, the Keep Brockton Beautiful Day, you expand that into, Keep Brockton Beautiful so-and-so, if you can build off a name recognition, that's how you, once you get people involved, I think you keep that connection, you build off of it. So yeah, I think, we have to, remind ourselves that, we have been doing things. It's not like, I know there's a lot the city could be doing, but, let's not beat ourselves up all day, every day. There are good things, good events that Brockton's been holding, and, it doesn't help us to not be promoting the good things too. we've got to work on, the obstacles, but we got to, uplift and congratulate ourselves when the city does have these events and so on. So let's keep building them up. And then in terms of collaboration, I do think that is another key piece, working with stakeholders in terms of, big landowners. We think about, a big part of the open space and rec plan does focus on city-owned properties. Excuse me, so the parks, the conservation areas, playgrounds. The city already owns them, but that doesn't mean we still can't pursue collaborations or get, nearby landholders invested, in their abutting conservation properties or abutting parks, or, get them involved in other ways. I mean, I think the Audubon Preserve and Stone Farm have been a success in recent years due to the collaboration with Wildlands Trust. They've been a great collaborator in, pointing us towards funding, pointing us towards, sources of manpower. How do you build boardwalks? How do you get people to come build boardwalks? They've been a great resource for, rehabilitating those trails and making them, much more amenable for passive recreation. So, we need another collaborator like that. Wildlands Trust is very focused, on sort of, as their name suggests, sort of the passive recreation, promoting conservation areas. But certainly there's other collaborators that, might be more interested, or their focus is more on, active recreation, the playgrounds, the parks and the sports fields. Certainly we could be doing more to find those good collaborators, who, they don't work for the city, they don't necessarily live in the city, but they've got a mission, or they can tap into, people outside the city. We think about, how do we invigorate the people of Brockton? But I mean, there's people outside of Brockton too. I know there's people that are coming from different places in Massachusetts to walk Stone Farm and the Audubon Preserve. So these are people that live, in cities and little towns like Easton, they are coming to Brockton because they heard about it through Wildlands Trust. So I think those collaborators, the ideas of, getting us sort of on the map too, getting us talking to people outside the city that can say, this has worked in other communities, like we said, finding who are our role models for other cities. I think if we can find some collaborators who have worked in other cities and can, say, well, I know, such and such, they were doing this with their parks, we could, we have the map of how we did it the first time, we can do it in Brockton too. So I think definitely collaborators, whether they be nonprofits or, I mean, God forbid, businesses, maybe if you're, a private landowner or you've got a business, some of the bigger stakeholders in Brockton, maybe there are untapped connections, in terms of, it benefits everyone to see our open spaces look good and seem inviting. So I think there are stakeholders out there, there are potential collaborators that we need to consider. Again, because even when we're talking about city land, there are other people, that want to see it succeed and beyond just, the city hall and the people that live nearby. I think there is investment that's broader than that we can tap into. Okay. So yeah, we've been given a lot to think about with this session, I think. So I think, a lot of, I would say, sort of at the level of needs and goals, I think we've tapped into a lot there. So, everything from, our natural resources, our river system, how do we promote, maintain, protect in the future those resources. Again, we talked about, neighborhood parks and how do we maintain what we have before we start thinking about adding more and so on. So I think a lot of these things we've talked about, we're at the level of needs turning into goals. But as we've sort of outlined and as Laura's brought up, with the open space plan and with implementation in general, there are steps between the needs and goals and then the actions and actually getting things done. So I think something we'll need to, think about as we plan future meetings, over the next couple months, as we work on the draft, come up with the goals and the new action plan is, we've got some goals we can kind of shape, but we've got to fill in the table of, where do we actually want to take this? So I would invite everyone to think about sort of these broad needs, broad goals we've talked about, and think about, again, in the idea of next 7 years, what are some things that we want to put forth that the city is going to work to do these things. And so I think, as I keep saying, it's the who, what, when, where, how. If we can start filling some of those things in and we'll see, when the action plan is put together, there will be, ideally timelines, ideally the interested parties that'll be involved. And so I think that, that's what we'll be thinking about then is, how specific can we get? And again, we do keep in mind, as we've brought up, something can be a specific action and still be preliminary in the sense that, in another 7 years, it could lead to something else. Because again, it's all about meeting people and meeting Brockton where we're at. So, we might not be at the point where, we're going to do a clean sweep of the entire city and it's going to be clean and we're all going to be good. Like, some of our actionable items might be, to identify a mechanism to do something, because maybe it's perhaps a little too ambitious to say we're going to get everybody out and we're all going to do these things. That's a lot. But if we have some action items of how we can, figure out why we're missing out on certain groups, why there's apathy, why there's a missing communication between the different, city bodies, government bodies, community groups, that could be an action item too, is just, relinking, building new connection points, opening up communication. If we think that there are bodies or groups, that need to be in closer communication with each other, that could be, an actionable item too, is finding ways to make sure people are talking to each other. So, yeah, so I think then, so we have, the recordings here. We have written comments. Again, I think we've got a lot to work with. The survey's still going, and that covers a lot of it. So I think it's giving us a lot to work with, again, in terms of needs and goals. So I'd invite everyone again in the coming months, we'll have more public input. I'm currently, we're working with different groups for maybe some non-Zoom opportunities that, might get tap into some different groups, start building, keep building on this sort of list of needs and goals we've got. And again, thinking about, in the coming months, putting together, feasible actions. So we want to be ambitious, but we want to be specific. We want to be feasible, because if we just make a list of things and say, here's all the big picture things we need to do, even with an implementation committee, you can't do things, you can't. So ambitious but feasible. I think we've got room to be creative. Obviously, we're not being graded that we're going to fail if we put actions that are ambitious and we can't achieve them in 7 years. But it's good for momentum. I think maybe if we have a mix of things, like short-term things that we know, oh, specifically, we need to go out and do this. Somebody needs to talk to this other person. We need to arrange this. And then you check that off. I think we need a mix of things, sort of the low-hanging fruit with some, things that we're going to swing for the fences and try to do this, still being specific. But so with that, then I don't see any other, hands. So unless anyone else has any final thoughts, I will put a wrap on this inaugural virtual open space public input session. And I will be following up with everyone, again, with sort of the next steps. I will let people know as other opportunities for public input come up. I'm trying to make sure, stuff gets posted online, people know about it, but certainly I will be sending out those opportunities so that the working group, again, if you're available, sometimes it might be, during the day, depending on, when people are available, but certainly anyone from the open space working group, if you'd like to attend with me, for example, we'll have something at the Council on Aging about a month from now, so people are welcome to come and help, talk with that group. We might have, other groups we might be meeting with in the meantime. And yeah, if there's any ideas, if you're part of a group that has regular meetings or holds events that might be interested in doing, a smaller group, that way we could do in person, but, do it knowing that, okay, there'll be 10 people and we can have 10 people and it won't be an issue, then definitely, let me know. Any other chances to talk to more people and start, we're building this list of needs over the next month or so. And then I think starting, in March, we'll start synthesizing and get into the bulk of the plan. But I think we're on the way. We have a lot to think about, but thank you to everyone for going through this process. But yeah, stay tuned for the next thing, and hopefully I'll be talking to you all soon and hearing from everyone else, some new faces, some new voices in the coming months as well. So with that, I am going to hit stop. And yeah, with that, I'll say good night to everyone. Thank you for coming. We'll be in touch.
Good night, thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you.